I'm going to show you how to deploy a Fabric network with EVM supported to IBM Container Service. So you could deploy smart contract written in Solidity to a permissioned blockchain platform and interact with it using Web3.js library. So you instantly gain the benefits of permissioned blockchain, such as data privacy and performance, without modifying your existing code written for Ethereum. You won't need Bluemix and Kubernetes CLI to interact with your cluster in the cloud. You can fetch them using the following instruction. So first of all, you need to create a Kubernetes cluster in IBM Container Service. This can be done via WebUI or Bluemix CLI. I have one created here. As you can see, it's called EVM test. After you log in with Bluemix CLI, you can use this command to fetch cluster configuration. Then you need to export this so that your Kubernetes CLI knows where the cluster is. Then you need to clone this repo, which contains necessary artifacts to deploy a Fabric network to this Kubernetes cluster. And then you go to CS offering script, where you can find a create all shell script. Then you simply run the script to deploy the Fabric network. It may take a while. What this script does is to deploy 2 peers and 1 orderer to the Kubernetes cluster. It also runs a Kubernetes job to generate crypto artifacts, create a channel, and join those peers to that channel, and then install a sample chain code to validate the deployment. When it's finished, you could use Kubernetes CLI to get pods. Then you need to copy crypto artifacts generated to your local machine so they could be used to interact with the network. So if you go to this folder, just download it. It actually contains all the crypto artifacts that you use to interact with your peer and orderer. And then you need to get the public IP of the cluster to talk to the peers in the cloud. And you need to copy both public IP and the absolute path to the crypto artifact, and then edit Fabric cluster YAML file, which is the configuration file used for our proxy. So your Web3.js based application will be talking to a local proxy, which adapts JSON RPC calls to Fabric API. You need to clone this REPL, which contains the proxy code. Note that we currently only support Golang 1.9.3. And you need to provide the path to the config YAML we just added as the environment variable and start the proxy. Now I could go to another tab and start Node console. I already have Web3 installed globally, so I could simply import it in my Node console. And then you can start deploying your smart contract as you would typically do in Ethereum using Web3 library. So first of all, you need to create a Web3 instance with local HTTP provider. So that your Web3 will be talking to the local proxy we just ran. You can try to get account address. You need to set this address as your default account to interact with your contract. Then we're going to deploy a very simple Solidity smart contract, which is a voting app. You can find the code in this URL. So we use Remix IDE to compile the contract to bytecode, as well as the API. And then we will define a variable to hold the bytecode. And then you're going to create a contract type using the voting API. And then you could deploy the contract to Fabric network. We're going to give A and B as the constructor arguments, and the data being the bytecode we just copied over. Then we use the transaction hash to get the transaction received, which contains the contract address, and you will instantiate a voting contract using that address, which will be used to interact with the contract deployed in the Fabric network. And finally, you could use this contract instance to invoke all the methods you defined in the contract code. For example, you can list all the proposals and the current vote count. And you can vote for a specific proposal and then retrieve the result. Here's a recap of all the material we used in this video. Here's the Fabric chaincode EVM repository under Hyperledger. We basically wrapped Burrow EVM implementation as a Fabric system chaincode plugin. If you're interested in how Fabric EVM integration works under the hood, you're welcome to check this out. This repository contains the work-in-progress proxy code, which will be eventually merged into the repository mentioned before. You can find all the commands we typed in the node console here in the instructions empty. For example, this one we used to get the count. And here's the smart contract deployed. And also we use this command to actually list proposals and vote for one proposal. And this is a script that you use to deploy the Fabric network to the container cluster. And obviously, you will need the IBM Cloud Container Service at the very beginning